Mouse Guard, and this is the creator commentary for a story in Legends of the Guard Volume 1, titled Potential. Joining me are the creators of that story, the writer Alex Kain and the artist Sean Rubin.
Hello.
Hey.
All right, so let's start with this story. Anything you guys want to tell me about where it came from, the origins of it, before we start diving into pages and panels?
Oh, man. Yeah, I mean, when Sean and I sort of found out that we were going to be able to work together on this, we put together a couple of ideas. I had 3 ideas that I sort of wanted to pursue, and we sort of talked through them, and we picked this one because we felt that it sort of, honed in a little bit more on the themes of Mouse Guard, the series as a whole, and we really liked, kind of how simple it was, not in artistic execution. It's very complex. There's a big bear. But it's a simple sort of story about why the Mouse Guard is important and what purpose it serves in greater mouse culture. I have the original sort of outline that I wrote for it pulled up here on the screen from many years ago, and it was a lot more complex. This was back when I was, overwriting everything.
Yesterday?
Yeah, quiet.
Okay. Well, the original story was like 20 pages long, I think, as I recall correctly. There was a flashback sequence.
Yeah. Sorry, David. You were about to ask.
Well, I was just going to ask Sean if he had any kind of overarching memories of the origins or the theme that he wanted to touch on before we started getting into some specifics.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say it's great to be doing this. Also, in respect for what we're trying to achieve with this particular podcast, Alex and I got on the phone with each other a couple of days ago and basically shook all the sillies out by riffing for a good 45 minutes. So we got that out of our system. I asked my wife if she thought it was a good idea to be funny. She said, well, you could only be funny if anything that you say would be understood by most of the people listening, so I guess I'm not going to try too much.
Yeah, no, it's a bad idea.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, the thing I remember mostly is, I think, David, the conversation that you and I had about this project, I was actually on a train to Princeton, New Jersey, en route to Falling Water in Pennsylvania. So... and it was pretty late at night, and it was on a Friday. May have been like 9, almost 10 o'clock. And I took a bunch of pictures when I was on the property of Falling Water. That's the Frank Lloyd Wright home, for those of you who aren't familiar. Google it. It's very pretty, to say the least. And some of those photographs actually made it into the references for this project. So I had completely forgotten that until I was sort of looking over some notes last night. Like, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense. A couple of trees and things are actually from that house. So that's what I remember. And then getting a hold of Alex, and we've been wanting to do something together for the longest time, and nothing had really synced up. So it was great that Mouse Guard was actually the first time we were able to do that.
Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah, it was.
All right, so page 1. Just to kind of get you guys started, I think it's interesting that the first 4 panels have no dialogue, no narration, and we'll get to page 2, but the title of the story doesn't even occur until page 2 after we've gone past 5 panels. So let's talk about page 1.
Yeah, no, it's the original draft I remember for this had this really cool canister, actually as a glass vial, that Eskel would kind of, I don't know if he opened it or like broke it, but there was some, in the original script it wasn't as interesting as what he's carrying here, and this was actually all Sean coming up with this idea for the this really sort of decorative, like purpose-built canister where, I sort of imagine a room somewhere where there's like a whole bunch of canisters with different designs on them for all the different predators in the mouse territories. And this is like, this is the one that you carry the bear stuff in.
Well, yeah, I think when we were talking through this, I think the idea for the canister was really that if they were going to be carrying bait for a predator, the idea that they could accidentally break it open would be, well, you wouldn't want to do that, and
be
they
problematic.
Right.
Yeah.
So they would try to find some way of preventing that from happening. So some sort of metallic thing that had a latching mechanism that had a key to open it up. It's also the case that this was just kind of an interesting thing to draw. I wanted to start it with a hyper render, and then sort of zoom out a little bit, and then have the sort of a potpourri or whatever it is falling. So just did a bunch of sort of motions with my hands, and I remember like taking like reference photography when I was doing this and trying a couple of different things, and this is kind of what came out of that. And then the design just was, in order to get a sense of what was going to happen, there was some foreshadowing with the first panel, but it was a lot of fun to do.
Yeah.
I've actually drawn this canister twice myself.
Oh.
Even though this is a legend story, I've drawn this now twice. It appears in Black Axe as kind of an Easter egg when we get into the matriarch's chamber that has potentially all the wisdom and knowledge passed down from matriarch to matriarch, and that room is lined with all the stained glass windows of the great matriarchs of the past. I put in a couple artifacts along the back shelf, and this canister was one of them. I love that design. I love the idea that Alex said that there might be more canisters with other designs, and not so much that they're already prepped and ready. I like the idea that they're sitting empty, and somewhere there's some kind of naturalist with just sacks full of different leaves and spices and whatever, and that he knows the precise mix, and he'll mix it and put it in the precise canister so that then it can go out, it can be locked and then go out on patrol for that specific purpose. But the ingredients are never blended together until the need arises, and then they're put under lock and key. And the second time I did it was just kind of an homage. I've been doing some pieces that are homages to different legend stories, and I got to draw Eskel with the canister.
The funny you mentioned the idea of like an herbalist character. That was actually one of the other story ideas that we were sort of knocking around before we settled on this one. Was, we were trying to figure out what is a good, like, sort of compelling 10-page story, because I think that was right around, we knew it was going to be like between 8 and 10 pages, and it hadn't been finalized yet. But it was, one of the other ideas we were tossing around was like, oh, maybe there's like an herbalist who wants to contribute but doesn't know how, and that would be like, it's how the scent border was created, and that was their contribution. But ultimately, yeah, it sort of distilled down into this
For the last
concept.
panel on page 1, did you have any specific reference that you wanted to call out there, Sean?
Yeah, this was actually, some of this stuff was from my parents' property on Long Island before they sold it. So I think these were some leaves that were lying around, and I actually don't know the name of those little sort of spiky thingamabobs that fall out of trees.
Brambly booze is
Brambly,
the scientific term.
Yeah, I should have looked that up.
If they're slightly rigid, they might actually be from like the husk of a beech nut.
Yeah, maybe.
But if they're soft, it might be something else that just looks like that. I'm not sure. I'm trying to guess based on your drawing.
Yeah, but yeah, we used to have a lot of those lying around, so that kind of got in there. But these were actual leaves. I think I actually put them on my desk. So I just sort of went outside and grabbed a bunch of leaves, and I'm sure you've never done anything like that, David.
I usually actually don't. I usually leave the outside. Every now and then I'll bring, and if I do, I bring like a leaf in.
Yeah.
Just
A mouse, a sword.
Just one.
A Wolverine. Yeah.
If you get 2, you get a problem.
Yeah.
All right, so page a Wolverine. I caught that. All right, so page 2, potential. We finally have the title in that first panel. Tell us about potential.
It was actually a lot. Usually, I have a really hard time coming up with names for things because it's a very definitive sort of process. So I always leave a placeholder name until like the very, very end. So for the longest time, the story was to us the one with the bear. The one with the bear.
The thing with the bear.
Yeah. Ultimately, like, it boils down to what is the theme of the story? What is the story about? If can you boil it down to like one or two words?
But the title didn't come in until after the story was written.
Yeah. We had a draft of the story, and Eskel's little speech at the end was originally a little different, but then we remixed it a little bit, and the word potential got introduced into the script, and that sort of resonated and became the title of the story.
And then panel 1 here we have both Eskel and is it Osric? Osric, yeah. Is this one of those trees from the property around Falling Water?
No, this one's actually my parents' house. It was they had for years they had probably 30 or more hemlocks that were completely around the perimeter of the property, that most of which had died by the time that they had sold it because it was affected by sort of a weird hemlock blight. But at any rate, they had a lot of these different trees, and they're very sort of craggy and interesting. So I think this was one of them. You also got that scaly bark, which is a little bit more interesting to draw. A lot of interesting stuff with negative space as a result of that. So that's kind of where it came from. I like the little like the twigs are a little more. They're a little bit less rigid as they're coming out of there with all like the pine needles and everything. So that's why they're in a hemlock. Can I acknowledge the existence of Redwall?
Sure.
Yeah.
In all seriousness, the other thing is that a little bit of an Easter egg.
Let me preface that with.
Go ahead. What is
for
Redwall?
For those of you who don't know, Sean Rubin, who illustrated this, has illustrated how many Redwall books? 2 Redwall books. That was kind of a starting point of our conversation, was that I was the Mouse Guard guy. He was working on Redwall at the time. And that's how we got to know each other. So yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. I had to cut you off.
Yeah. It's a sword that looks a lot like Martin's sword is actually strapped to the back of Eskel, with the red pommel stone, and it's a hand and a half bastard sword, they call them sometimes, with a 3/4 blood channel and a red pommel stone. So there you go.
Wow.
And yeah, in the second panel there, it just teleports to Redwall. It's a completely different story there.
Yeah, why did we put that in there?
I don't know.
Back to panel 1 for a second here. Something else I wanted to point out was I like the kind of retconning, I assume, here, for the fact that you're listing in the name of a town, Barkhamstead, but that it does not appear on any of the Mouse Guard maps that it existed up until that point. And so it's listed here that it's in the dialogue that, it's so small that Clark hasn't even charted it. Clark's Cartography being the main map maker in the Mouse Guard series, or not the main, but one of the key map makers in Mouse Guard.
Yep. That was, we, the map that you did is pretty, is a pretty great resource, and it helped us sort of figure out where this area was with regard to Lock Haven and other major landmarks. We wanted it to actually be somewhere where we could feasibly not have a full patrol sort of check it out. It is kind of like out of the way. I have a note here. I don't know if it's actually relevant anymore in the newest draft of the script, but the idea is that it's 2 days west from Pebble Brook on the map. And so the idea is that
that is far out.
Yeah, so it's out in the middle of nowhere, and so that was how we sort of got around. Like, oh well, yeah, it's small. Why isn't it on the map? Well, Clark, he hasn't gotten out there yet. The another little bit of trivia here is that Barkhamstead is, the name of a town that I would pass every time I would return home. I used to live in around Hartford, Connecticut, and I would drive up to the Berkshires to see my family. and right on that route, I think it's 44. There's this little town called Barkhamsted, and it's surrounded by all these other old-timey named towns, and it felt like a perfect sort of fit for the more naturalistic town names that you see on the map.
So for page 2 of panel 2, you've already alluded to this this library being very, very Redwallish, but was there anything in the script about what visually was going on in that panel, or was it just show a slice of life of Barkhamsted, and it was up to Sean to library it up, or was there any kind of reference to that in the script?
Sean, maybe you remember. I'm looking at the script here, and I think that it was just like an agreement between us that Sean would get to do a library scene at some point.
Yeah, I think what it was is we actually made a list of different things we wanted to include in the visuals. So there's like, snow, trees, rope, library. These are just things like, oh, it might be fun to draw those. We needed.
I'm not laughing.
Yeah.
I'm like laughing, completely understanding. Where
Yeah.
you're coming from. Yeah.
Yeah.
Making the list of things you want to draw. And
Yeah.
Staying away from the things you don't.
Oh yeah, I made a significant mistake on my last project of having multiple scenes that required drawing more than one car. It's like I don't know how to draw cars. I still don't know how to draw cars. But
something I like about the inclusion of the library is it's listed here that Barkhamsted is so small, and it's kind of implied maybe it's not worth the time or effort of the guard, but that by showing a library, a very full library, as the slice of life panel, mentioning that Barkhamsted is worth the effort, of the idea of like the lost library of Alexandria, like there's more than even just the living mice who are valuable and worth saving, but there's potentially a library's worth of knowledge here in Barkhamsted.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why we liked it ultimately is very similar to what you're describing. It's kind of shorthand for culture. Like here's definitely something going on there. Like you could have drawn all sorts of things. There's opposed inside of a tavern, family or something. But it's like, oh, there's a library, and a lot of things are implied by the existence of a library. So it was kind of a good way of just doing in one panel. Oh, okay, that's what the town is about. And I enjoyed drawing it, so it kind of came out.
And then that third panel is purely foreshadowing, letting us know what's coming. So let's skip ahead to page 3.
Yeah, so got some action mice. So this when I sort of spec'd out the story, one of the big inspirations for this the set piece that sort of drives the story is this giant colossus of a bear, and I really am I'm a big fan of there's a game called Shadow of the Colossus. That sort of gamifies this whole routine here of jumping onto a creature and figuring out how to take it down, and it's got like a puzzle sort of element to it, and it's got multiple stages to it. So figuring out how a little mouse takes down a giant bear was kind of a fun process. But in the very early stages, Sean would razz on me a bit because the script just said, and then he fights the bear. And that
mouse battles bear. Mouse battles bear.
I've written scripts like that where it's like 5 pages. Mouse battles crab.
Yeah. But
I'll figure it out when I get there.
This sort of ties into Sean's, and Sean can speak to this a bit more. Just the idea that you don't actually see the full creature at all. This spread, you see sort of hints of it, and not even, So yeah, Sean, I guess I'll let you talk about that, since this is the script. The script was just like 2 lines here, and it was just, Sean, make pretty things happen.
Okay, well, thanks, Alex. We'll mute you for now. We appreciate your contributions here. It's looked like Ostrich has like never been up a tree before. I was just noticing that on the first panel on the left page. It's like
he's kind of,
it's
he's
sort of
grabbing it.
for dear life.
unsure.
Yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't want to fall. There's a bear.
Right.
There's a bear down there.
It's just a nice contrast to Eskel, who's obviously confident enough to jump off in the next panel.
Right. A couple of things went into this, like Alex was saying, that video game. I remember also thinking about the way the cinematography was handled in the Chris Nolan Batman movies, where in order to actually make Batman seem scary as opposed to a ridiculous person in a suit, the camera work was really close. You never sort of saw the whole person during any of the fight scenes. So that was kind of interesting to me. And that actually carried over. It was really doing this book, this story, that carried into the book that I just finished, Bolivar, which was about a dinosaur that lives in New York City because he's trying to avoid anyone noticing him. And the reason I bring that up is because I remember doing the story and then kind of thinking, oh, it's just really interesting. You could make the most important character in a story. You could hide the most important character in a story and get a lot out of that. So like in the later book, it's the dinosaur. You never really see the whole dinosaur. You just see his tail, or you just see sort of his nose. But that really came out of doing this Mouse Guard story.
Interestingly enough, with Mouse Guard, it makes sense because a mouse so small would have to be at such a distance to actually be able to see the whole bear at once. So
right.
I don't know that they ever could see the whole bear unless they're at a great distance.
Right. Yeah,
so that plays right in.
It's sort of like it'd be like a landscape or a mountain almost. Are you familiar with an Ed Young book called Seven Blind Mice?
No.
It's that's one of my favorite picture books, and it was also an influence on this. The seven blind mice go up to an elephant. One's got the tusk; it's a spear. The tail; it's a rope, and the wisdom is that, of course, the parts make the whole. We don't all understand it, etc. But that juxtaposition between the mouse and this very large animal and the inability to actually understand the whole thing. Also played into that. So it was a lot of fun for that reason. So because you're actually doing this, treating it more like a landscape, the hair became more like grass, and it's sort of interesting to see the mouse interacting with, the bear's fur. It kind of has this sort of reedy, wavy thing going on.
To a mouse, I mean, really, it is just like a big moving mountain that eats things.
Right.
Yeah.
On page 3 here with the words that are in the word balloons, forgive me, I can't remember in terms of technical file stuff. Were those on a separate layer? Is there tree behind those balloons, or are those balloons drawn right into the art?
No, it's a separate layer, and I don't do things like this anymore. I have a completely different way of handling lettering. That's actually just looking at that. I
was just wondering, because I know that Alex was saying that the script was still kind of evolving as this was being drawn, and I would think if that looks like it's drawn right in, so I would think that the script would have to be pretty close to locked, not just knowing what panels words are going in, but how many words, because that's going to dictate the size of the balloon.
No,
that's all separate.
It's all separate. Yeah, it was done on separate layers, and then I'm not 100% sure how the lines were sort of what do you want to call it, selected out so that they look the same as the background lines. It probably took a long time. It was sort of a long walk for a short drink of water, as a good friend of mine likes to say. But,
And continuing on to page 4, same kind of thing here with panels of the walking landscape and Eskel preparing to stab. And instead of actually seeing the pierce, we get this 2-panel reaction shot out of the bear's face.
Yeah, I always like the sort of what is that, a diptych, sort of like the two just like how, I don't know, it definitely feels a little bit more. There's something, I don't know. I don't know what it is. I'm a writer, so words aren't my specialty. Just the impact of it, like you can definitely tell, and it's also like a slightly red sort of tint to it, so you can tell that he's enraged. And like the rings around the eyes. It's great. I always like that.
Yeah, Yeah, it was kind of interesting playing with the visual vocabulary of the 9x9 grid with the square, and then finding different ways that you could utilize that to kind of do weird stuff. Like this is an example of that. Was a lot of fun. Um, yeah, I don't 100% know where that came from, other than it just was kind of like it felt like okay, bear disruption. So of course, if you're getting stabbed, that's disruption and something like that. But yeah,
Yeah. Sometimes it just feels right, and
yeah, exactly.
yeah, even if it's a subconscious reason for the creatives, there's probably something that still resonates with the reader.
Mm-hmm.
And then the dialogue in that last panel, I always think it's interesting that because I know Mouse Guard, it's my thing, and then I'll put out an issue and I'll be getting fan feedback. People will come up to me at my table, or they'll email, or I'll see reviews of the book. And what I think is crystal clear evidently isn't. I've left out some detail or something where they're interpreting what the guard is or who a character is completely differently than how I see it. And one of those is that the guard is like an army, that it's like a royal army that has authority everywhere. And what I like about this dialogue is that Alex did a great job of kind of re-explaining my initial premise, and I like that because it helps emphasize something that I thought I had made clear in other books, but at the time that this came out, I don't think it was as clear. So it's nice to have this story kind of reinforce what I was already doing.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, it felt like to me anyway, it always felt like you'd explained it pretty well. Especially in the in fall, it felt like a lot of time, especially in that first issue, was sort of spent with Kenzie explaining to Liam the core tenets, and to me it sort of felt like okay, well that's the those are the dictums. How do you can you apply that to any sort of scenario or any kind of is that an adequate motivation for this whole entity? And yeah, I mean, it really sort of they keep civilization in check, and that seemed very intriguing to sort of write just a little short story that builds on that, that shows that it really is every little settlement matters. The story for fall expanded pretty quickly, but it always starts with that one, just the one little grain merchant, and then it sort of balloons into this vast conspiracy. But that intro always sort of resonated. That it starts off very small. It's like, oh, they sent like three mice to find one grain merchant. That's very interesting. So yeah, that's sort of where that came from.
Just a little technical note. The onomatopoeia, grar, or whatever however you want to read it.
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to remember how I did that, because actually looking at it now, it's kind of unusual. I think it was a grease pencil that was scanned, and then the colors were inverted, and then it was stuck on top of Photoshop using a screen layer. But yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, I probably would do that digitally now, which I'm probably losing something as a result.
I like the onomatopoeias in this. There are quite a few. We've got Fump and Gra, and we see some later.
Yeah.
This is on onomatopoeia watch.
All right, moving on to page 5. Here we have Eskel. He was on the back of the bear last time. Evidently, he's hopped off with the Gra from the bear. He's getting to safer ground. Then the next panel, he's tying that rope that Sean wanted to draw.
Yes, it's a nice rope. It's a good. You did a good job on the rope.
You notice his cloak is getting more and more screwed up as time goes on. Although it's not much is happening to it, but somehow it's still winding up with holes in it that weren't there 3 minutes ago.
It's battle damage.
Yeah, is that what it is? Okay.
Yeah. Got to sell those action figures.
Variants.
Yeah, I love the composition of this page. Just that bear is the nastiest looking son of a gun. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting artistically too from a push your eye through the panel scenario, because even though you need to go to panel 2 before going to panel 3, his eye line in panel 1 is driving you right to the bear. There are the little hemlock branches kind of also leading you back up into panel 2, but even when you get to panel 2, and if you did the right thing and went from 1 to 2, then his eye line is driving you right back down to the bear. So it's also the darkest panel on the page, and your eye kind of wants to go there anyways because it's so different from the others.
Yeah,
and then compositionally coming out of it, the foam in the bear's mouth kind of is trailing into what would be panel 4, and the angle of the hemlock branch that's over Eskel also helps that flow. But I think it's a really interesting page in terms of that flow, without a whole lot of elements kind of doing that work for you.
Yeah, well, thank you. I wish most of that was intentional. I mean, other than, as you know, David, it's just like, okay, the composition needs something, we're going to put this there. But the little hemlock sprigs, or whatever you want to call them, were a lot of fun to draw. They kind of was like doing that whole Japanese print thing. So it was fun to kind of put them in there just to have something against the light-colored background to give a sense of where it was, and then have that juxtaposed to the more solid-looking bear panels. But actually, I really like doing this 2-page spread because, again, this is one of those mirror spreads that I know you're very fond of, where you have the vertical, horizontal, and then the two underneath the horizontal, and then it obviously mirror, so it's a reverse on the other side.
Yeah, when you get to page 6, it actually, in fact, let's just go to page 6. When you get to page 6, you see the panel layout is the exact mirror. I've been doing the creator commentary for fall, and I actually feel like every time I have to reference that this page is a mirror of the last, it's happening so often. It's like, am I just sounding like a horrible echo at this point?
Very David Gibbons. Just a piece of trivia. I actually remember doing the 5th page. I was in the teacher's lounge. I was teaching high school at the time. I no longer teach high school, but I remember doing the bear sitting at the table in the teacher's lounge. I had a printout of the sketch that was taped to a light box that I used to use, a very thin light box. I've since also stopped using light boxes. But I was just kind of sitting there on my lunch break or something, drawing this thing because I had to make deadline. I think it was probably about a month or 2 late for that reason. But yeah, so I hadn't thought about that for a while.
Anything else to say about this page before we move on? We got the onomatopoeia of ploink.
This is actually the first time really that you get an idea of the scale of mouse to bear. Just the size of the creature is, you still don't even see the whole thing because there's no way for you to see the whole thing. So I always like that too, is that you see that like one of the claws is bigger than the whole mouse.
Yeah.
I like it. I dig it.
All right. So on to page 7, furry mountaineering.
Well, this is, they'll never let me draw a Batman story. I don't think. I would doubt that. So this is just sort of getting all that Batman, Spider-Man stuff out, the mouse into the void with a rope and all sorts of different things. Yeah.
Now I've forgotten quite where, but I do remember that there became a point where I don't know if it was both of you or if it was just Sean who emailed me saying, "Houston, we have a problem."
It was me, and this was the point. Yeah,
about panel layout or page count.
Yeah,
and that you were kind of estimating, you had gotten over your head a little bit in terms of how much story and the pacing of it, and realized I need another page to be able to actually get this story all the way to the end. But unfortunately, because of the nature of the comic books and the pagination, and that other people had turned in their stories, there was no way to just add 1 page. In comics, you always have to add 4 and sometimes 8, depending on the printer. It's a technical issue as to why. and that was not going to happen. So I said, well, show me show me what you've got, and maybe together we can figure this out. And I seem to remember in kind of rough layout form penciling a few, not penciling, but drawing the initial doodles for kind of what was happening in some of these panels. But honestly, I can't remember which ones anymore. I feel like the last one on this page, on page 7, is a me panel, but I might be wrong.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. It was. I think I may have already had the first one. I don't know that if I had actually been left to my own devices, if I would have attempted something as explicit as the last panel on this page. But I think it works great. It's actually it's a really cool panel. I like his hand against the pommel, sort of driving it in there. The kind of like bolt action. That's how they slaughter cows actually, oftentimes, where you're just sort of like driving a nail through the forehead. So I think it made a lot of sense. I couldn't really even figure out how to kill the thing. I think was also part of the problem. Yeah. I'm like, I've got a sword. He's on his nose. Now what? And you're like, well, what if?
To be fair to Sean, I have the line here, which is just Eskel action as he deals the killing blow.
Sure. Yeah. No, I know, and I've gotten myself in those predicaments too of going. I don't know how to. Like, I have the beginning, I know that last page has to be this, ending wrap-up, but there's no way I can fit the stuff that's in the middle into what's left of the remaining pages. So it was definitely out of sympathy that I'm like, hey, I've been there, let's see if we can try to solve this problem together.
Yeah, it was super helpful for me because I'd never done a comic story before, so I was surprised that I had gotten as far as I did without hitting that wall, to be honest. And I think what we wound up doing is we actually wound up pulling some pages that we had fiddled with in the beginning, and then we wound up condensing some stuff in the middle. But the biggest problem was definitely page 7 into page 8, and once we sort of figured out page 7, I couldn't get from him being on the side of the bear to killing the bear. Once he actually put the sword in the bear's skull and sort of falls off and crashes, it was a little bit more straightforward. But no, that's absolutely what happened.
Staying on page 7, was there any reference for the bear? Because now we're actually seeing more bear. We're getting more than just glimpses now. This is kind of our first real chance of really seeing bear face and bear snarl and.
I don't remember. There must have been, because I don't know how to draw bears off the top of my head. Yeah.
Which is, this is I guess it wasn't supposed to be a bear originally. I believe we started with a wolf, and there's something, I don't know, something not right that Sean brought it up, and it's just one of those things where like I guess there are wolves in Mouse Guard already, and also it doesn't seem right to have him actually just kill a wolf. So we picked like a big meaner creature. And that's how we sort of settled on the bear. Bear is bigger.
So, Alex, you brought up that the original script said he delivers the killing blow. Very vaguely, he delivers the killing blow. Yes. Was the dialogue or the narration worth dying for, attached to whatever panel that was, or whatever the visual was when that killing blow was dealt? Worth dying for was there, or was that something that was done after the art was completed, where you went, yeah, we need something there?
No, that was legit there. The whole line there is, Eskel boxed as he deals the killing blow, worth dying for, dying in italics, which you can definitely see in the text here as well. There's that emphasis on the word dying. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so that was sort of the point, that, it doesn't matter which creature dies, it's worth it. To defend this culture, this settlement, it's worth sacrificing oneself for it. It's worth killing a living creature for it. So that was sort of the play there that I was going for.
And on to page 8, we now have the aftermath of the killing blow.
Big old singing bear.
That's the
So Alex and I were
death
debating
cry.
exactly what happens here. Does the bear, if the bear dies like on top of the settlement, how are they going to move that thing?
Oh, they
Also,
don't.
okay. Also, was the damage done before he killed the bear, or was it done on account of him killing the bear?
Oh, so this is
Yeah.
only my personal headcanon as the person who wrote this story, Sean. Uh, but the idea is that the bear was there before and was harassing the villagers and did
Right.
some damage to the village, and that's
Okay.
when they sent. That's when they sent for the guard.
Ah.
So that there is a whole backstory in the original script where, like,
I'm-
yeah.
I was close. I mean, I had assumed that they, Esco was there for a reason. He knew that he didn't bring the bear canister out of luck.
Yeah, fortunately, I have just the thing we need.
But I assumed that the damage to the town that we see in panel 3 of this page was caused by the collapse of the bear. But that ultimately, mice didn't die. So it was, yes, some you have to break some eggs to get an omelet.
Exactly.
Some of the windows went down, a couple of walls, maybe bookshelves fell down interior, maybe somebody even twisted their ankle inside. But if they had let a bear run around, the whole town could have been wiped out.
It's bad news.
Bad news bear.
Bad news
Bad,
bears.
bad news
Bad
bears.
news
That
bear.
was
that was
I
actually the title that we briefly considered.
yeah.
Architecturally, was there any influence for the kind of swirly? We see it at the library shot at the beginning of the story, and now here we see those windows kind of again popping out through the swirly root work of these trees. Any influence there? Any specific reference point there?
I think it's the typical like Gothic, what do they call it, trifoil or whatever. It's also like the Trinity symbol. We're just trying to find something that kind of looked like a mouse might make it.
Hidden Mickeys?
Yeah. No, it's probably more in the sort of like John Howe, Alan Lee art design for the Lord of the Rings movies.
Nice. All right. Anything more to add about page 8 before we move on to one of the next things in the checklist for what Sean wants to draw?
I'm still very fond of the way the movement of the leaves, and also the sort of the perspective of you could get a sense of the leaves sort of going out and away from the settlement with this dust cloud. That's the sort of thing that you try to do, and about 9 times out of 10 it doesn't quite work. So I remember being happy with the way that came out, and I still am looking at it now. Yeah.
I think I didn't even think about the what you guys brought up about what happens next,
Right?
Other than repairing the town, but what happens to the bear? How do they? And it is interesting that there probably could be a lot of benefit of being able to harvest materials from the bear for that town in terms of what the fat can do, what the meat could do, even to try to lure other predators further away. If harvested properly, the fur obviously and teeth and bones and claws have all kinds of uses, I would think. So this could be a huge boon to the town.
Yeah, you could make a lot of silly hats out of that hide.
Actually, I've been thinking of that, David. Like the possibility of like going back later and there's this sort of creepy mouse settlement that's like just a hollowed out bear skeleton where they've all kind of like
Yeah.
It would be like Ray living inside of a toppled AT-AT.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, they annexed Barkhamstead to be twice as big as it was before. Inside of the rib cage of a bear.
Yeah.
It smells bad, but the money's good.
All right, so moving on to page 9, we get, like I said, another thing on the checklist. Snow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So Sean, tell us about the snow. Why the snow?
I don't know. Snow's fun. I think ever since that snow started accidentally falling at the end of the battle scene at the beginning of Gladiator, people are just putting snow in everything. You know, that King Arthur movie they made a while back with Keira Knightley. It was just like, remember that one scene in Gladiator? What if we did a whole movie like that? People in armor in snow.
Yeah.
But
I always assumed it was a Mossflower thing myself.
it might have been that too. I don't know.
Because that takes place or it starts in the winter. It's a very sort of
That's the second Redwall.
Memorable.
Second Redwall book.
Yeah,
for
the
those
second
aren't-
Redwall book.
Yeah.
Is there a method for the way that you did the falling snow? Is all the sky area done darker, or is that was that done digitally after? Was there any kind of pencil making the sky darker?
I don't think.
So that the flakes stick out as white?
Yeah, I think what's going on here, I used some textures, which would have been probably getting like rustic textures or just like photographing concrete in some places in order to give it more of a little bit more modeled look. In other places, what you're actually looking at is probably a Photoshop dry media brush that's being used as an eraser to kind of pull away some amount of like one color and then exposing more of another color underneath. So in this case, I think a lot of the snow is actually just sort of drawn very ham-fistedly as balls or whatever, pellets in the actual drawing. And the way I work, if anyone cares, is I actually will draw a picture on a piece of paper using a 0.3 technical pencil, usually HB lead, and that gets scanned into a computer. The levels are adjusted in order to increase contrast, and then I'll use Photoshop layers to put color over that, varying opacity, and also there's all different kinds of ways you could blend layers to get certain effects and try to take full advantage of them. Most of the spreads you see here probably had anywhere between 20 and 40 layers of color, all told, in order to get this effect. So the darker color would have been a layer that's going to be sort of underneath the white, which is where the snow is. And then looking at it, it looks like there's been a slight motion blur applied to the white in order to give a sense of movement, which is, again, sort of a ham-fisted way of doing it. But actually, it seems to hold up.
Yeah, I think it's subtle enough that it doesn't come off as an effect.
Yeah. It's probably... yep.
Panel 2, I think it's interesting that in my original kind of visual reading of this, I saw the frames around the windows as being complete, either knot holes of a root or a branch, or the entire root. And here we're seeing them almost like they're gathered, like they're woven, like a woven basket. It's a really beautiful effect, and I like that it means that that the mice did it. It's not just that I love the idea that mice are scavengers and they take advantage of what they find. You know, if they had found a knot hole and they built a window to fit that knot hole perfectly, great. But this is more of them kind of building their world. They're warping nature. They're making it work for them.
Yeah, I mean, I like textured cylindrical volumes, if I may.
Put that on your tombstone.
Right, exactly.
So
worms, tendrils,
snakes.
trees, snakes, octopuses. That's something about getting the contour lines when you're shading it with the cross hatching is kind of fun. It's just that's always been something I'm kind of interested in. I think the way I like to draw sort of lends itself to doing things like that, I suppose. So you'll see a lot of those things there. But I've also always really enjoyed drawing trees and tree bark for some reason. So a lot of these little inventions, I guess, are more about trying to take advantage of that.
And in panel 2, where we have the dialogue saying, "But there is potential here. There is Osric in the window. I'm sure not by mistake, referencing that he's there visually tied to the word potential."
I don't know if that's Osric. I think that's just my limited abilities at mouse character design. Nobody.
Obviously, because of the last panel, it's clear that it's not. I take that back.
Yeah.
It's Osric's twin brother, Osric.
It's
Oz Richard.
Yeah.
There's Osric and Oz Richard.
That's the thing. They don't have a colored cloak on. It's so hard to tell. You know?
That's yeah.
Everybody who works there has the same dumb hat, I think, as Steve. Yeah, no, that's interesting. No, I think that was more. I like switching. Like you're looking up, you're looking down, so you get a sense of that's what the mouse is looking at. He's looking outside of the window, but then also it sort of jumps down to the bottom. Who's the person stuck cleaning up the mess?
Yeah.
So it's just this mouse boarding up windows, sort of by himself. They're hanging out, drinking hot cocoa or something.
That one, I don't think them sitting there in the library drinking something out of mugs was one of the necessary things that you wanted. But I remember being like, oh, what happens after you kill a bear? Well, you go hang out in the library and get some cocoa. It's
eat shawarma, right? That was
bear shawarma.
Bear shawarma. Right. This is a shawarma scene. These mugs are actually, I got these mugs at a flea market in Chile when I was there in 2010. I got them because they look like the type of mugs that would maybe do well in an illustration I might wind up drawing in the future. So they wound up in here. They also wound up in a Redwall book, actually. It's actually, they were this color and they looked exactly like the way they look with this sort of pointed part of the handle.
Yeah. The little thumb grip.
Thumb holder.
Last panel we get the third panel we get the map, which I think that was on the list of things Sean wanted to draw.
Yeah.
Although I might be wrong on that one.
You can see that. I do like drawing maps. Yeah.
And then last panel we get this another great shot of the library that kind of ties it all together, because we're seeing the damage, we're seeing the outside with the snow falling, but we're also seeing how that ties into panel 3 with Osric and Eskel at the table. I have a question about the sound effect that Eskel is saying. What does that sound effect mean to you guys?
To me, it's sort of like I always sort of pictured it as kind of like a glottal sort of stop. Like so there's a little bit of backstory here, and Sean, I don't know, maybe you had something completely different in mind when you did it. I'm actually going to look at the script real quick just to make sure that it's not something that I described.
It's blurp. You're saying blurp?
No. Yeah. So the action in the script is just suddenly deep in thought. There's a little like backstory with that it'll sort of come into play on the next page a little bit. But the idea that that Eskel has sort of he's got like a I don't want to say a sordid past, but there's like he's labeled as a patrol leader, but he has no patrol. So there's this element of, he's sort of on this lonely road. We cut all that stuff out because that would have required another like 15 pages to actually establish. But it sort of worked out in the end with a simplified story, because the idea is that he's selling Osric on the concept of the guard and how important it is, why he does what he does, and he's trying to explain why he's there, and he sells it so well that Osric now wants to become a guard and contribute to that. And I always imagined it at Eskel kind of like ooh, it's kind of a big deal to join the guard. You just met me like an hour ago, so could you actually become a guard? That's a very good question, and then that sort of ties into the idea that yes, if you believe in the mission, then yes, you can absolutely become a guard.
That's a lot into one little symbol.
Yeah.
The reason I ask is, to me, visually, that symbol is remarkably close to one that Eastman and Laird used a couple times in the Ninja Turtles comics for almost like the death cry, or the death whisper. Like when a character is basically dead, that the sword is in their belly, they're bleeding out, they're dead. Kind of like how Stan Sakai and Usagi Yojimbo will do the kind of skull and crossbones inside the very wiggly weak balloon. I didn't bring it up when the story was being turned in, because it was really obvious by the next page that that's not what it meant, and so I thought maybe I'm just too specific there, but since I had you guys here, I thought I might as well ask.
No, it's possible that he's just dying.
Yeah, I think he's dead. The remainder, no, he's dead. He's dead, and the rest of this is it's the afterlife, which is remarkably similar to the normal life. No, I think you
maybe it's more like how in popular culture now we go like, oh, I'm dying.
Yeah,
I'm dying.
It's more like I'm dying with the hand wave sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't you actually use something similar when in winter with the owl?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, now that you mention it, because I just read that to my son somewhat recently for the umpteenth time. Huh. No, it's great. It's better than almost everything else that I could get stuck reading a 4.5-year-old as a bedtime story. David, thank you so much for writing this stuff. Very much for that reason. I'm serious. Can we just read Mouse Guard instead of Berenstain Bears?
Berenstain Bears are great. Berenstain Bears for life. I don't have to read them.
I don't know. You guys just did a story about the importance of mouse life versus bear life.
Preachy children's books. Everybody has a smug expression on their face at the last page.
Oh man, these are just like the hot takes that we're so much of a kerfuffle.
Yeah, no, come at me Twitter for that. No, it's to me it's like a sort of a balloon like popping, because he had this train of thought. He's sort of pontificating a bit, unlike what I'm doing right now. He sort of lost his train of thought, so that
gotcha.
Gets a new one. That's kind of where I was coming from, just kind of like a beat. So, but in hindsight, I would have chose something different.
No, I think it works. I think some of that's my own baggage. So moving on to, before we get too distracted with a single sound effect, moving on to page 10. The future of the Guard depends on her tender paws.
So all this text came in. I think this was the last bit of text that we wrote. I think that this was right around when we knew that it had to be 10 pages and it had to end on a specific beat. And I think Sean, you helped. I gave because none of this is in the script that I have here. The script that I have here, the original one was, tell me, could I become a guard? Eskel, deep in thought. And then it's just, this is why we train Tender Paws. And I was like, and why I returned to Lockhaven. So I guess the idea in the original script was that Osric becomes sort of Eskel's Tenderpaw, and they go back to Lockhaven, and there's that sort of tied into the original idea that there was this other patrol that had been lost, but since we cut all that, we leaned a lot more onto this. This is what the Guard fights for. We don't fight for what is, we fight for what could be, and that ties into, David, your intro for Fall, which I've always loved, which is that they don't fight. Oh God, now I'm gonna totally botch it. They don't fight to live, but to thrive, or something to that effect. It's
I don't know if that's in the intro to Fall, but yeah, the idea that they don't just survive, they thrive.
They survive, they thrive. That's right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it
was more than just survive, but thrive. Yeah, something along those lines.
Yeah, so it was playing off of that. That was the idea that we tried to finish off on. And I think, Sean, you edited this a little bit, and I gave you the script, and then you gave it back, then I gave it to you, and then you gave it back, and that's what we settled on.
Yeah, there was it's funny. I think part of what the inspiration for this was actually based in a fundraising campaign that the school I was working at was doing, and somebody may have said something like this, but it was people were questioning sort of vision casting and the fact that they were how they wanted to handle a capital campaign and why it was necessary, and I think I had been thinking a little bit about that when I actually written some of these lines, which then Alex and I edited, but it's kind of funny. I think this is actually the case with a lot of things, which is that if you're trying to build any organization or society, if you don't have vision and people are afraid, then how could you ever move forward? So, at any rate, And then
Eskel has.
yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and then the panel with the hood was actually based on a statue of a mourner that was on the grave of it's either a bishop or a nobleman in a tomb in Burgundy, I want to say. It was like under renovation or something, so they had taken all the statues and they had sent them to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York at the time, and they just had all these really interesting sort of hoods. So I think we ripped one of those off and sort of put a mouse in it. But there you are.
As one does.
As one does. Yeah.
Was the walking stick in the
no
in that grave motif?
I don't think so. I mean, I think the idea behind this panel, I guess, is that she's watching Ostrich say goodbye to his parents, and probably remembering when he did the same thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's the combination of the sword and the staff that I find kind of interesting, because I tend to do
one or the other.
Mice get one weapon and don't usually have multiple things, it just makes it interesting. Like he's kind of both. He's kind of both the contemplative Kenzie and the warrior Saxon in one.
Yeah. His mouse guard RPG spec sheet is just all over the place.
Yeah, it's just one of those. You got a sword, and you got a staff, and you got a magical cloak, and you could fly. And you're like, dude, no.
No.
But please notice the very inefficient way in which they're walking on the second panel of that page.
They're doing plot. It's plot walking.
It's plot walking. Is that what it is? Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure that Eskel knows something about the depth of the snowdrifts, left or right, in those meandering directions. That makes this the best path. That's why he's a patrol leader.
I guess so. Probably the case. And then we decided to just communicate that they were going back to Lockhaven by showing Lockhaven on the map. The two empty mugs. No.
Excellent. Well, that is the story Potential, which is found in Legends of the Guard, Volume 1, published by Archaea. If you've enjoyed this commentary, please leave comments in the section below. Let me know what Sean and Alex did answer or didn't answer for you in the comments, and subscribe for updates when I add more Mouse Guard commentary. Alex, if people want to get a hold of you directly, what's the social media link that they should be following?
They can head to Twitter, and I'm TDC Presents.
And Sean?
Twitter and Instagram, both Sean C. Rubin.
Thank you for listening.